Mercy was once a normal girl, living a normal life. She had loving parents, a little sister she adored, friends, a life. She had stability and comfort, and like many of us, she took it for granted. Mercy lived with no fear, no regrets. She lived in the moment and loved it until she lost everything. It was a mundane evening, like any other. Her parents asked Mercy to babysit her sister so they could have a night on the town. Like a typical teenager, she griped and moaned about it, but begrudgingly agreed. Mercy didn't know that moment, that decision, would shatter her world by the end of the night. Mercy had put her sister to bed, cleaned up dinner, and plopped down on the couch. She stared at the screen and giggled a bit as she saw her favourite movie, 13 Ghosts, start up. She let out a sigh as she finally relaxed and settled into her comfy spot. Halfway through the movie, Mercy was zoning out, wondering where her parents were. A sudden knock on the door pulled her back to reality. Mom wouldn't knock, was the first thought that she raced through her mind as a chill went down her spine. Her sister, Jessie's voice once again dragged Mercy back to reality. The knocking on the door was getting aggressive, and Mercy could see the fear in Jessie's face. Mercy motioned for Jessie to get down and hide on the stairs. Mercy slowly walked to the door as dread coursed through her veins. With a deep breath, she ripped open the door, braced to protect her sister by any means necessary. The sight of two police officers killed all of her momentum, froze her in a spot. The next few days zoomed in a blur around Mercy. The officers had told her that her parents had died in a car crash. A drunk driver. They had told her with pity in their eyes. Soon, Mercy and Jessie were in a car with a stranger, being brought to child services. With no other living relatives, the sister were now wards of the state. Mercy and Jessie spent the next few years going from foster home to foster home. They experienced abuse, neglect, starvation, and every other despicable thing a child should never have to experience. Through all the pain, though, at least they had each other. That solace, though, was soon ripped away from them. Mercy was 18. She had aged out of the foster program. Mercy was thrown to the mercy of the world, with no money, no hope, and no body. Mercy begged the courts, begged the states, begged anyone who would listen. She begged to be with her sister. Sadly, though, with no means to support herself, let alone the both of them, Jessie remained in foster care, while Mercy was thrown on the streets. When Mercy couldn't feel more alone and hopeless, news of her poor sister's death reached her. With Mercy not there to protect her, Jessie was beaten to death by her foster family. The sight of her poor sister's broken body broke something in Lucy. The last shred of love and connection to the world was ripped away from her. Mercy was shattered, a shell of her former self. Mercy spent the next few years walking the streets, mourning the loss of her family, the loss of her life, the loss of hope. Dead to the world that abandoned her. She felt invisible, unseen, unwanted, until one night when a car pulled up. A kind smile greeted her as a nice young couple asked her if she needed help. Mercy felt something she thought was lost. She felt a spark of hope build inside of her. The couple offered Mercy food, clothes, and a bed. Most importantly, they offered her compassion. Mercy's hesitation was soon smothered out by the woman's warm smile. The woman's smile reminded Mercy of her mother's. If only Mercy had noticed the venom behind the woman's eyes. As soon as Mercy was in the car, that familiar feeling of dread seeped through her body as she realized her mistake. The kindness was sucked out of the car as the feeling of malice seeped in. The woman's kind smile was now a smile of a predator licking her chops. They sped away as Mercy's screams went out into the world, begging once again for help. Once again, the calls were not answered. The couple tortured Mercy endlessly. The physical pain was horrendous, but what was worse was the psychological torture. With each cut, each stab, each burn, they would spit acid at Mercy's soul. No one is looking for a girl no one cares about. You're worthless. No one is coming for you. No one cares. You are nothing. But still, Mercy endured. With each new scar, her soul grew darker. She felt the hate, the rage grow and consume her. She would make them pay. She would make them all feel the pain she felt. The pain her poor sister felt. Eventually, the couple got bored with Mercy and grew frustrated she wouldn't die. They were ready for a new victim, so just like the world, they disposed of Mercy. While she was still clinging to life, the couple chained weight to her ankles and headed to the lake. The couple laughed and prodded at Mercy as they rowed her out to the deepest part of the lake. As they threw her overboard, they left her with these last words: "You are trash." As Mercy slowly sank to the bottom, she didn't fight death. She embraced it. Feeling the darkness fully consume her, her last thought as the life drained from her body was revenge. As her soul began to drift up towards the light, something pulled at her ankle. The blackness she had felt consume her body had left it and grabbed her spirit. In the blackness, she saw chains begin to manifest around her spirit and begin to weigh it down. The blackness spread throughout her spirit, changing and consuming her, forever tethering her spirit to the place where her life was stolen, where her soul was darkened and filled with rage. Every day Mercy's rage grew, waiting on those who took her life. It wasn't long before the couple came back to their dumping ground with their latest victim. As the couple rowed, they giggled and joked cheerily. They were quite satisfied with their latest kill and had long forgot about Mercy. The laugh was soon cut short as they felt a small jolt in their boat. The silence continued as the boat idled and came to a still. The man shook off the fear and checked on the motor. As he leaned over, the motor roared to life. The sudden sound of the motor was nothing compared to what the woman was seeing. As she looked towards her husband, she saw his hand was gone. In its place was a bloody, gory stump. As she let out a piercing scream, she felt the world fade around her. When she finally came to, her husband was gone. She frantically looked around for him, but it was pitch black. There was no longer a moon or stars in the sky. She had to wave her hand in front of her eyes to make sure she hadn't gone blind. Trying desperately to calm the racing heart in her chest, she crawled around the boat, looking for any sign of her husband. It was just as she found the blood that the silence was cut by sinister laughing coming from every direction. "Do you need help, sweetie?" The woman tried frantically to see where the voice was coming from. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere. The laughing picked up again as the woman started to panic. After what seemed like hours, the laughing stopped. As the woman began to relax a bit, the boat was hit on the side. The woman clung to the other side and began to weep. Slowly, Mercy rose from the lake behind the terrified woman. Mercy dug her long talons into the woman's arms. Mercy dragged her fingers down the woman's arms, tearing skin and flesh as she did. With a wicked smile and venomous eyes, Mercy leaned in close and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll help you." Mercy ripped the woman out of the boat and dragged her down to the bottom of the sea. Mercy tore into the woman with her teeth, careful to keep her alive, feeling the pain as long as possible. When Mercy was satisfied, she took one of her talons and sliced across the woman's throat. With a satisfied grin, Mercy sank back to the bottom. That is where she still waits today, waiting for her next victim to come to her lake, waiting to cause as much pain and suffering as she can, waiting to make them pay. So I've always had an attraction to the paranormal or anything supernatural, even as a young child. My babysitters made me watch A Nightmare on Elm Street when I was 5, and it just went from there. I've never been easily frightened. In fact, I'd say I've been frightened twice in my life. One was when I thought my house was being broken into. It wasn't. And the other time happened when I moved to a house in Manchester at the age of 7. The house was big and creepy to look at, I guess, but my family never really thought so. My bedroom was tiny, and it was all the way at the back of the house. My parents put me there because I was a sleepwalker, and being at the back of the house, they'd hear me walking around before I got too far. The other thing about being there was that it was dead silent at night, because it was so far away from everyone else's room. My room had this big, thick-framed window. They were old, but very well made, and they also completely nullified outside noise. It was like being in a vacuum once my door was closed. My first night in that room left me feeling uncomfortable. I always felt like I wasn't alone in the room whenever I was trying to go to sleep. It unsettled me, but I never mentioned it or complained to my family. I'd been living there for about half a year, with the same feeling more or less every night. And then one night, I woke up. For absolutely no reason. This was unusual because I'm a deep sleeper and rarely happens to me. I just felt like I shouldn't be asleep, like there was a voice telling me to wake, now. I sat up and my room was silent as usual and completely dark. It was always really dark on the floor space because my bunk bed and curtains completely drowned out light. When I sat up, I looked over the side of the top bunk. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something. I lay back down and tried to clear the feeling I was being watched out of my mind. I turned my head to look out of my window and drew the curtains back, and immediately got the feeling I was being watched again, but closer, like someone had climbed half of the steps on my bed and stopped to look at me. I quickly glanced around, but again couldn't see anything, even with the moonlight and streetlights coming through my window. For the third time, I felt I was being watched and turned to the window again. An old man, probably in his 60s, was stood on our garage roof. I immediately shut my eyes. Our garage connected to our house through a little cooler room, and the roof of that room was below my window. I told myself I was imagining things and opened them again. He was still there, but closer now. I could see his face clearly. He had deep-set eyes that were brown, balding silver hair and greying stubble. He had a hooked nose and thin lips. The most bizarre part was teeth. They were perfect. Straight and white, but the moonlight hit them and it just made them look menacing. His attire looked old. It looked like a costume from Oliver Twist. It was dirty, covered in dried dirt or soot. I could only keep my eyes on him for a second or two before I closed them again. When I opened them, his face was pressed right up against my window. I fainted or fell back to sleep and didn't wake until morning. When I woke, I was on my bottom bunk. I never slept on the bottom bunk. I don't even have a mattress or sheets on there. I didn't immediately remember the events of the night before and just assumed I'd been sleepwalking and stopped there. I went through my normal morning routine and got ready for school. My mum dropped me off and I went into a shop near my school to get some sweets before school. As I walked in the shop, all the events of the night before hit me. I remembered all of it, and it immediately shook me to my core. I was that frightened, I told my teacher, who called my mum, and she picked me up and brought me home. My mum reassured me that it was just a dream, but I knew it wasn't. It was weeks until I'd even step foot in my room again, even longer until I'd sleep in there. Eventually, I did sleep in there again. I never saw the old man. I never even dreamed about him. I did have another experience about a year later. This experience was the worst that ever happened to me. We bought our first house in a development that had recently been a privately owned farm. The first few years were uneventful. Nothing unusual had happened. My oldest son was around 14 and confided in me that some scary guy had been waking him up and bothering him while he was sleeping. I wasn't sure what was going on, but the energy in the house was becoming increasingly oppressive as time went on. My first experience with it happened late at night. I'm a night owl. My spouse had worked nights, so I was always conscious about making noise while he was sleeping. So I got in the habit of holding the doorknob in my hand, turning it and then turning it again to release the tumbler into place to shut the door. One night, as I'm holding the doorknob in my hand, I feel the knob turn back and forth in my hand a couple of times. I thought one of my boys was playing a trick on me, so I turned it again and flung open the door, lunged into the hallway and loud whispered, "Gotcha!" Well, to my surprise, no one was there. I checked the boys' rooms across the hall and all were blissfully asleep. It was impossible for one of them to have let go of the doorknob, run to their room and pretend to be asleep in the time it took me to open the door. I was rattled. The next time I woke up out of a dead sleep. You know how someone surprises you and your arm lashes out to get them away? That's what I did, and with enough force to break 3 fingernails when my hand hit the bed frame. I looked up to see a black, featureless figure standing over me. All I could think of was, "Don't show it that you're afraid." So I said, "Well?" No response. So I said it again. Still nothing. Then, with all my courage, I said, "You woke me up. If you decide you have something to say to me, let me know. I'm going back to sleep." I rolled over and prayed the damn thing would go away. It started bothering my son so much and the energy was so nasty in the house, I decided to seek the help of a psychic. She advised that it was the previous landowner and he was livid that his children sold off all his land to make a buck. She also told me he was a terrible person in life and was still extremely nasty. So we made a plan to sage the house to get rid of him. I was in the basement doing laundry and I was at the computer. I think he liked to hide in the laundry room as it was super creepy in there. I was thinking about saging the house. Maybe subconsciously, I felt his presence because the thought popped into my head, "Your days are numbered, you son of a bitch." As soon as the thought registered in my brain, I got hit on the backside of my head with enough force that my chin hit my chest and whiplashed back into an upright position. I could feel a wave of energy as it travelled through my freaking head from back to front. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Then the fear hit. I felt sick and disorientated and ran out of the house as fast as I could. The psychic said I needed to sage the house immediately and that we should leave afterwards and stay somewhere for a couple of nights. I packed up the kids' stuff, called my spouse, and got the motel room. I was so terrified as I was saging, afraid he might attack me again. I did the laundry room last, and I left the sage burning in a pie plate on the concrete floor. We returned after 2 nights, and the entire house felt so much better. Lighter, no bad energy at all. Even my spouse sensed it, and he was skeptical about what was going on. I could feel where it hit me for a long time afterwards. I also learned that being disrespectful, even to an asshole, has consequences. I'll never make that mistake again. I'm 12 years old, and I just wanted a friend. I've never had a friend. I see people every day with their friends, smiling, laughing, and having fun. I enviously look on, hoping someone would acknowledge me. I even tried to talk to a few people. They all ignored me. Every single one. Was it the way I looked? Did I smell funny? To make the loneliness worse, I don't ever see my parents anymore. They just were gone. One day, I was sitting on a bench in my favourite park, when I overheard a group of 3 kids talking about an old abandoned house in the outskirts of town. I was staring directly at them, and when they left to go to the house, I followed. I stayed a little ways behind them as they treaded along the sidewalk, laughing and joking as people with friends do. Finally, they stopped and faced their destination. It was a giant mansion, but it wasn't pretty. It was terrifying. Moss and algae were covering the house. There were cracks in the windows, and the grass looked as if it hadn't been mowed in years. I gasped loudly and covered my mouth. I didn't want them to catch me spying. Nobody looked back. I sighed with relief and edged closer to them to listen to their conversation. The leader of them, a tall boy with glasses who looked to be only a year or 2 older than me, said, "This is where it happened. 50 years ago. A man broke into this house, murdering the husband, wife, and their son." I looked up at the sight for sore eyes and shuddered. "What were their names?" a girl about my age whispered. The tall boy grinned. "Terry and Linda. Their son's name was Isaiah. He was never found." Horror filled my eyes as I looked at the giant mansion, a relic of what used to be. Isaiah, Isaiah. Then I remembered. My name is Isaiah. For a moment I was silent and waited with bated breath. The tall boy continued his story. "It is said he still roams the town. If you listen really quietly, sometimes you can hear him," the boy said, breathing slowly and eerily. Tears filled my eyes. I shouted, "No!" louder than I've ever screamed in my life. The group of 3 kids panicked and ran away as fast as they could. I slowly walked up to my old house. I whispered to myself, "At least someone finally heard me." My husband and I treated ourselves to a night at Barbara Blue in Chicago. We didn't get to do things like that usually, so it was awesome. The rates were very inexpensive, and there were certain things you had no access to, room service and the minibar, but we didn't care. Since there wasn't room service, we ordered off Uber Eats. Nothing fancy, just potbellies. I went downstairs and it's 10 p.m. to wait and smoke a cigarette. To be kind, I went around to the side, but still near the front. There was no one walking around. I got the food, but decided to finish smoking around the side. Suddenly, a really nicely dressed dude with a camo mask walked up and asked me for a cigarette. Normally, that's not an issue, but he seemed a bit off. I can't explain it, except to say as soon as he asked me, I felt like something was wrong. His voice sounded odd. When I gave him a cigarette, he got really close. Then it started to get scary. He asked me for some food. I felt bad, but it wasn't possible to give him food. It was 2 sandwiches. I said I was sorry, but it was for my husband and I. I figured he'd leave and I could finish smoking. Instead, he walked up so close he was against the food bag and I was against the other side, almost pressing the glass. Then he asked for some of the food again, and when I said no, "I'm really sorry," he insisted I could, but I was lying. He was getting angry, but he wasn't yelling so as not to attract attention, I guess. It continued like that for a few minutes. Then he asked to use my lighter. I gave it to him, and he started in on now I was lying again. He insisted I could give him food. Then he asked if I worked there, not a specific place, and I said I was staying at the hotel. I was already really nervous. He asked where I was staying, and I asked why. And he said because there were lots of hotels in the area. I pointed to the hotel behind me. I don't know why, but I was really anxious by this point. This whole interaction so far was scary, and I usually have no issue dealing with people. However, he was getting pushier and angrier. He then said, "So you're staying here?" I said yes. During this entire time, he kept saying I was lying about the food. He started getting closer and closer to me as I backed up. He kept angrily insisting I could give him food, but I didn't want to. And I said, no, I am sorry, I can't. We were already too close for comfort and safe distances. He was pressing against the bag I was holding against my chest, and his face was inches from mine. He then said, so you're here with your boyfriend? I said husband, and I saw him check my hand. I started walking back towards the back door, which was about 50 feet away. I thought if I didn't act afraid, it would turn out better. But I was terrified. His cigarette was lit, and he was still holding my lighter. People usually give it back at this point. He continued demanding some of the food. I felt it was time to be more assertive, so I demanded my lighter back, and he started getting angry at me, saying over and over that I could give him some food. He then gave my lighter back, but grabbed both of my arms. I started getting terrified and banging on the glass door with my elbow to get the receptionist's attention, but she ignored me. He got pissed and said something, but I was so scared I wasn't paying attention. I just wanted help. If anyone reading this knew me, they'd know I'd never bang on a window yelling help unless I felt absolutely terrified. I started crying because I was alone on a side street at night and no one could help me. I had no thoughts but to get away. I wasn't thinking he'd hurt me in a specific way. I just thought danger and run. That's how scared I was. He got angry that I was crying and pulled me closer. Suddenly something happened that changed everything, and I'm so grateful. My mom called. I had my earbuds in, which he couldn't see because my hood up on my coat. So I pressed answer and started crying hysterically and almost screaming. He's trying to attack me! He's trying to attack me! That really angered him because he tightened his grip for a second, but also startled him, and he let go, and I ran to the doors while still crying and shaking. I cried all the way back to the room. My mom comforted me on the phone and told me not to go outside again. My husband was so comforting and sweet. He just held me, and then he wanted to know everything. I had to say it a few times because I was still crying and couldn't breathe, plus I was walking fast. I saw him again at maybe 1 a.m. I was standing in front of the hotel this time, where those tall ashtray things they have outside restaurants and hotels. I went inside and I saw him through the glass where he'd assaulted me. I don't know if he was waiting for me or what, but it terrified me. The same night, another person asked me for a cigarette, and it was this really nice woman. She thanked me, but she could tell I was upset, I guess. She asked and I told her. She sympathized and explained that's why she carried a very small handgun which was in her purse. I'm definitely getting mace, so this doesn't happen again. I am an empath. Not in the way you might think though. Anyone is capable of being empathetic. Well, most people. I literally feel what other people feel. I was walking down the sidewalk the other day when I saw somebody trip and fall. I didn't physically fall down, but she had hit her head and it looked painful. It probably should have been, but she got up as if nothing had even happened. I, on the other hand, started screaming, the pain pounding against the edge of my head. It throbbed and jabbed at me, until eventually the pain subsided. Later that day, as I peered at myself in the mirror, I saw a giant bruise. That wasn't the only thing that had happened. When I was a kid, my friends and I liked to climb trees. We had been climbing one particularly high tree when my friend Joey slipped. Joey screamed as he fell to the ground. He landed directly on his elbow, but it didn't seem to faze him. He got back up almost immediately. I was still hanging onto the tree limb when I heard a loud crack. My elbow was snapped out of place. I screamed in agony and let go of the tree. I fell and broke not only my left arm, but my right arm as well. I had recognized this curse of mine at a very young age. It honestly made me rather reclusive. I didn't want to take other people's pain or misfortune. One day, that could seriously hurt me. I became depressed and mostly just stuck to myself after that. I would do the things I have to do, like go to work. I worked the night shift to avoid people, then go to the grocery store,